What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to this channel, we are mental health discussions through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I'm a writer, podcaster, and the director of our film festival, Horrific Hope. First film festival of its kind to be horror-centric and mental health focused. If you guys would like to submit your screenplays to be a part of our screenplay competition, as well as your short films and feature films, click the links in the descriptions below. And while we're on the topic of our film festival, if you guys, special thank you to our sponsors for this upcoming year, including Diabolical DVD, Fierce Literature, and Convicted Printing. And if you guys would like to sponsor the film festival and have your links along with theirs in the show notes for both our videos and audio, click the links in the descriptions below. Down there, you'll also find links to our social media, Patreon, movie reviews like this, and podcasts, as well as our mental health resource library. Today we're going to be talking about The Mean One. So I know that this film has gotten a lot of curiosity surrounding it once it went viral with its first ever kind of teaser image long before we got the trailer of David Howard Thornton playing the Grinch and kind of taking on this familiar mythology. And so here are my thoughts. So The Mean One tells the story of a being who has haunted a town called Newville and basically kills our main protagonist, Cindy You-Know-Who. And basically she returns home 20 years later to get closure and ultimately ends up on a hunt to destroy the Mean One once and for all. I feel like we're getting into this new era of horror that is kind of taking these familiar IPs and putting a slasher/supernatural spin on them. Of course, we have this one. We're a couple months away from Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. There's a Bambi movie that's being worked on right now. There's another. There's a Peter Pan movie that's going to be taking a dark twist. And is this the next era of horror that we want? And let me just say, for The Mean One, at least, while I am still curious about a lot of those other projects, this one kind of comes in a little bit less than desirable. Like, the course of this movie is attempting to parody the Hallmark movies that run nonstop around this time of year. And I think in attempts to parody those types of movies, that actually unintentionally kind of picked up the quality of those movies along the way. Like, this movie looks like a Hallmark movie, and I really appreciate that aesthetic to it, that it begs the question, in an alternative world, what would happen if Hallmark decided to make horror? And I liked the exploration of that question. I thought that it's really probably one of the smartest things that this movie does on a technical scale. On the flip side of that, it also begs the question, what happens if the Grinch's heart never grew 2 sizes too small, and he literally did not only steal Christmas from an entire town, but also at the same time murdered people and lived up in the mountains, and the entire town gaslit anyone that tried to say that he existed. There are certain aspects of this movie that I think are done really well. I think the gags in this movie are really fun, and proves that Howard Thornton might also be one of the best actors currently in the slasher genre. Now, there are obviously mannerisms that you can kind of see through that prove, oh, this is a grumpier version of Art the Clown. So I really had to break myself as I was watching that and being like, oh, this is the Grinch. This isn't Art the Clown. I need to kind of break that distinction. I've never wanted to watch Terrifier 2 so much in my life after watching a movie. But I think this movie wouldn't work as well as it did. And I know I've crapped on it a lot thus far, but I don't feel like this movie flows or works as well as it did if it's not for Thornton. Like, he's really kind of the saving grace of this movie, and the fact that, like, it's up front and center. Like, he's definitely very creepy, and he embraces the horror of this really well. This movie is comfortable in its identity, which I feel like you can't really say about a lot of movies. Like, feels like this movie, like they're like, yeah, we're making a schlocky movie. We're gonna embrace the schlock, and for that, I really respect this movie. Doesn't necessarily make it a great movie, but it has my respect nonetheless. And I feel like kind of some of the things that really kind of let me down about this movie is, first off, the fact that they opted to use CGI for the blood instead of practical. I know that probably might have just been a gripe of mine. I don't know if others watching this also feel the same way when it comes to watching slasher movies. I want to embrace the absurdity of the 80s and the 90s, of the Freddys and the Ghostface and the Michaels and the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, and really dive in deep and get blood and let it be gory. I don't feel like because this film opts to use 3D CGI, it really kind of goes against that. Not only does it make the film look cheaper than it probably actually is, but it feels like it's in bad taste. I also really didn't care for the way that a lot of the deaths took place off screen. Like, there's a centerpiece to this movie where the first image comes from, where a group of Santas pass through the town and are eating at a local restaurant. Grinch, mean one, happens to come in and just kind of goes off on these guys. And it's a great centerpiece surrounding this film. And you actually get to see the deaths and how creative the filmmakers are when it comes to the gags. But it feels like for a lot of the other gags that take place in this movie, they kind of either take place off screen where you're getting to see the after effects, or you're kind of, the way the camera's positioning, like you're seeing a hand go into a body part with a knife or something sharp, and you're kind of just seeing the fake blood pop up. And I don't know, it just kind of didn't do it for me. On the flip side of that, I feel like this movie, like I said, this movie feels like a Hallmark movie. So with that, it also has the pacing of a Hallmark movie. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are definitely parts in this movie that I feel like there is a lull. It definitely takes the slasher approach to its character development, to where there is some that happen with Cindy, but not really any of the other characters. And, of course, as many Hallmark movies are famous for, there's a love subplot in this one. Gotta have it, of course. What's a Christmas movie without romance? The majority of the acting and the writing on this project are also very on par with Hallmark movies. It's very cheesy, it's very campy, and it's at some points really hard to watch because it's so cringy. But let's run this through our Rorschach rating scale, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and give The Mean One a 2.5 out of 5. I feel like this film has a lot of promise, but never actually raises to that promise. I feel like it makes the smart decision at really building up the anticipation for The Mean One, and by the time that David Howard Thornton comes into the full picture, not just the shadows, it is a glorious moment. But the film never raises again to that moment of glory. The gags are really cool in this one, but overall, this movie becomes a parody of the very thing it's parodying. And I feel like perhaps in time, this movie for me could end up being what Terrifier 2 became for me. To where, if you guys saw my original review, I had issues with some of the narrative, and while I still have a lot of those things, I've come around to really liking it a lot more than I did on my first initial viewing. I think seeing that movie with a group of people in a theater and kind of having that communal experience really changed my viewpoint on it, and just really embracing the absurdity of the 80s slasher boom also really helped. And I feel like an experience like that could really change how I feel, even so slightly, on The Mean One when it comes to Regal Cinemas exclusively beginning December 9th. If you guys would like to find out if yours Regal is playing The Mean One, click the links in the descriptions below. Now let's talk about mental health, shall we? If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health from the film which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments, in hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. And for this one, I want to talk about the importance of closure. In the beginning of the film, we see Cindy, you-know-who, experience the brutal death of her mother right in front of her eyes, and kind of has this really traumatic event and spends the next 20 years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, therapy, and really is just looking for closure. So her character comes to Newville with the purpose of getting closure. Before I proceed, I just want to throw this disclaimer out there that I am not a licensed psychologist, grief therapist, or anything like that. In fact, I'm going to be pulling directly from my own experience. If you guys would like to hear more about the relationship between trauma and therapy, links are going to be in the descriptions below for our episode featuring Heather Leach, who is a licensed trauma therapist. I feel like is the best term. I don't know. Sometimes when I feel like I've gone through and I've experienced my own trauma in the past, and finding a way to move past that trauma and really grow on, there has to be closure to take place. Now, that's not to say that closure is going to happen for every traumatic episode or event that takes place in your life. Sometimes we have to just live with the knowledge that we'll never ever see the other side of it. It's always just going to be something that hangs over our heads, similar to like the clouds or a star. Something that I've experienced in my own relationships that have been impacted by trauma have been that working through the trauma with someone, whether that is a therapist or someone that is someone that you genuinely love or respect, whatever the case may be, sometimes that ends up working out really well. Sometimes it makes the bond of that relationship even stronger, and it brings back and highlights the importance of community. On the flip side of that, you have the grieving process, to where the closure has closed off that relationship for your own mental health, and so you're going through the grieving process, but at the end of the day, you're still finding closure. I think sometimes we kind of dismiss how important closure is to some of the traumatic events that we go through in our own lives, that we go through with people or individually by ourselves. But at the end of the day, sometimes closure is what we truly need in order to make a mental health breakthrough. I really hope that this is kind of a good tip of the iceberg. I highly suggest checking out the episode we did with Heather Leach on trauma and therapy. Again, links are going to be in the show notes below, along with our mental health resource library. The main one opens up this Friday with special advanced screenings this Thursday, December 8th and 9th, exclusively at Regal Cinemas. Check your links in the show notes below to find where it is playing in a town near you. Make sure that you guys hit that subscribe button, and we will be back later. Have a good night, guys.